Now, I'm intending this to be just notes, but if it all comes out the right way, then I'll probably maybe publish it, because then it'll save me work and I can get on to other things. One of the reasons that I even open with that preface is that I know I look like a newsie, and I'm not intending to. This is just notes. So you're looking at a notebook. This is how I look when I'm taking notes. Hear ye, hear ye. Or however newsies spoke. So I was thinking about the Evergreen protests. And specifically, there was this meeting on the 23rd of May at 4 o'clock at the in the library building on the 4th floor, and I'll show you some clips of it. And in this meeting, there were some pretty weird things that were said.
That's how whiteness works. Whiteness is the most violent fucking system to ever breathe. We're adults,
right?
And so I'm telling you, you're speaking to your ancestors. All right, we've been here before you. We built these cities.
Right.
You've had civilization way before you ever had.
Right.
Coming out your caves, okay? So
the thing is that my ancestors were slaves and your ancestors were not. Your ancestors came here of free choice and decided to bring along my people of their not of their own free will to work and build this country.
yeah, and the issue is that you're letting other people do it.
Put your hand down. That's my problem, George. You keep doing these little hand movements or whatever. Like,
Come through.
this is another show. Down. And I'm gonna decolonize the space. I'll just be roaming around.
My hands are down.
And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about, like, what is the mentality that's behind that? Like, what is really going on behind these statements? Like, decolonialize. What does that even really mean? And so I started looking at post-colonial literature, and as I went through that, I started to see that there's a basis to the vocabulary, at least, of how the students spoke. And I want to posit that the way that the students were acting derives from a failure of the institution. And a specific failure. Now, the failure of the administration was how they handled that, and then how they handled everything afterwards, right? And then there's the failure of the students to behave in a certain way. But behind all that, and what I've been trying to focus on by really digging into Evergreen, is to lay out proof that actually the faculty have more responsibility than either the administration or the students for what occurred that week. And why I say it's a failure of the faculty is because I think it rhymes with what is happening at other college campuses. And I think it rhymes with what is happening in the dialogue that operates under the umbrella of social justice, quote unquote. And what I see happening in social justice is that there's this thing called history. Right. And history is basically the story that's an assemblage of facts. And there's these two types of facts that I think constitute the bulk of history. One would be the advances, and two would be the injustices. So there's what we can loosely say is progress, and like people discovering things and people experimenting with things and people getting better in different ways. And then there's the injustices with all the wars and the slavery and the beating of people and just the normal human abuses. And what's happening a lot, I think, with social justice and a lot of the different studies groups, you know, gender studies and racial studies and queer studies, a lot of these studies that have to do with sociology and that use history as their data set, they tend to focus on the injustices with the inclination to make advances over the injustices. Whereas with something like STEM, with math and science and physics and perhaps economics, I don't know, but like all these other hard disciplines, they're mainly concerned with taking advantage of certain advances or advancing certain advances. Those are the two ways that you basically operate with advances. The two ways that you basically operate with injustices, however, are different. One recognizes the injustices, right, and then tries to adjust their behavior in order to make advances on those injustices. Now, what I see happening is that the conversation with regards to social justice tends to get stuck at becoming aware of past injustices by focusing on present advantages and disadvantages. Now, if you want to advance, you can't be unaware of injustice, right? But awareness in and of itself does not constitute an advancement over injustice. Awareness itself does not pay for past injustices that somebody benefits from but did not commit, nor does it repair inherited injustices that one suffers but wasn't even there for it to happen in the first place. So when we look at these college protests, it might be the case that they are pertinent, right, as acts of awareness or as acts of bringing awareness to a certain problem. Now, what I see happening is that bringing awareness to something with a certain sort of fervor, like is the case at Evergreen, if you're too fervent about bringing awareness of injustice, you can end up creating more injustice and not making any sort of advancement of injustice. And so that's why I think that, largely speaking, the Evergreen protest was a failure of the faculty to not only teach about injustices, but to teach about advances. Even though you suffer from something that you inherited, or even if you benefit from something that you inherited, that in and of itself should not constitute any sort of moral grounds to formulate a way to advance beyond the problem itself. History is a stockpile of advances that are invisible and injustices that are invisible. Right? We all take advantage of the advances that came before us, and only some of us are forced to reckon with the disadvantages that we've inherited. Now, if we are to advance beyond the disadvantages, we don't necessarily shuffle advantages from those who are advantaged to those who are disadvantaged. We don't take one and give it to another so that there's a deficiency. We try to solve the problem in such a way that the disadvantage goes away, that the advantage in and of itself is not diminished so much as everybody is brought up to the same level. And that is a very sticky problem. That's a very sticky problem, and that probably casts me within that political spectrum that's called leftist or progressive, that I think that it's possible that advantages can be shared without being taken away. But I think that disadvantages do certainly need to be diminished. And how do we do that? Awareness is the first step, but it is by no means an advancement in and of itself. Wonder if that worked.